I kept every letter you sent my husband. She said it standing in the doorway of my shop with a cardboard box held against her hip, and I had never seen her before in my life. I said, "Ma'am, I've never written a letter to anybody's husband." And she said, 61 of them, over 22 years. I want you to understand where I was standing. Shaw Fabrication on Kilgore Avenue in Muncie, Indiana. My father's shop before it was mine. 41 years. I had a torch in my hand and a wire spool half changed, and I was 3 weeks from putting the building on the market, because there is no work anymore, and there is nobody to leave it to. I said, "There's been a mistake." She put the box down on the bench. Cardboard, taped along one seam, the flaps soft from being opened and closed. And she took out a letter, and she held it up, and I read the bottom of it from 4 feet away. Emmett Shaw. My name, my whole name, in block capitals in blue ballpoint. I said, "That's not my handwriting." And she said, "Mr. Shaw, my husband walked out of our house in June, and I have spent 4 months going through every single thing he owns, trying to work out who he actually was. And you are the only person he talked to. For 22 years, so please." And then she said, "Where is he?" And I said, "I don't know who your husband is. My name is Emmett Shaw. I'm 49 years old and I bend and weld metal for a living. Badly some days, in a building my father put his name on in 1984. I have never married, I have no children. That is not a tragedy, and I'd ask you not to treat it as one. It's just an accurate description of a man who was in a shop 6 days a week for 30 years and never got around to the rest of it. And the reason I mention it is because when a woman tells you that you are the only person her husband talked to for 22 years, and you are a man who has quietly concluded that his life added up to about nothing, that is not a sentence you can put down. So I said, "Sit down. Show me." Her name was Junie Vetter. She was 37. Her husband was Roy Vetter, and he was 41, and he had worked pipeline and construction rotations for 20 years. Odessa, Williston, Fort McMurray, Casper. 8 to 10 months of the year, gone. She laid them out on my welding bench in date order because she had them in date order. 61 letters. The earliest one September 2003, the latest one May of this year. And every single one of them had been mailed. Stamps, real postmarks, Odessa, Texas, Williston, North Dakota, Rock Springs, Wyoming. 22 years of postmarks from towns I have never been to in my life. I said, "I've never been to any of these places." And she said, "I know. That's what I don't understand either." I read 4 of them standing up. They were letters to a man named Roy, from a man named Emmett, and they were, I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange, they were good letters. They were the letters an older man writes to a younger one over 20 years. The one from 2008 said, "You're going to want to quit in about week 6. Everybody does. Quitting in week 6 is not a decision, it's just week 6 talking." The one from 2014 said, "She said yes because she looked at you and did the arithmetic and you came out ahead. Stop looking for the catch." The one from 2019 said, "A man who sends money home every 2 weeks for 11 years is not the man you think you are. Look at the record instead of the feeling." And there was one from 2022 that I read 3 times, because it said, "You've asked me the same question in some form for 19 years, and I'm going to answer it one more time, and then I'd like us to stop. No, you are not that." I put it down and I said, "Mrs. Vetter, whoever wrote these knew your husband extremely well." And she said, "That's why I'm here. If you're still with me, and I know this is where people decide whether they want the rest, do me one favor and hit subscribe." Because about 4 minutes later I read a sentence in one of those letters that I recognized, and I recognized it because I said it out loud in this building in the summer of 2003, and after that nothing about this was a mystery anymore. Now, the first letter. She wanted me to read the first one properly. September 2003. It was 2 paragraphs, and halfway down the second one, it said this. "You're not a bad kid, you're a stupid one, and that wears off. Don't build anything on top of this." I sat down on a stool in my own shop. Because I said that. I said that sentence. I said it standing about 9 feet from where Junie Vetter was standing, on a Friday afternoon in August of 2003, to a 19-year-old I had just fired. Summer help. Skinny kid, no father in the picture, came in on a referral from somebody at the high school, worked 11 weeks. and I remember about 4 things about him, which I'll give you, because 4 things is all 22 years left me with. He was early every single day. Not on time, early, 15 or 20 minutes, standing out front by the roll-up door before I'd unlocked it, and it used to annoy me, because it meant I couldn't have the first part of my morning by myself. He ate the same lunch every day out of a plastic grocery bag. He asked questions all the way through, constantly, the same question 4 different ways, and I answered maybe half of them because I was 32 and busy, and it did not occur to me that a person asking that many questions is a person who has never been told anything. And in the 11th week I found a set of thread dies in his backpack, $400 of tooling, which in 2003 to me was serious money, and I let him go. He cried, standing right there, about 9 feet from where his wife was standing 22 years later. 19 years old and crying in a machine shop, and I remember being embarrassed for him, and I remember wanting it to be over so I could get back to the job on the table. That's why I said what I said. Not kindness. I said it to get out of the room. Then I gave him $90 in cash out of the register, which I have never told a single person until right now, and he picked up his bag and he went out through the roll-up door, and I did not think about him again for 22 years. I did not remember his name. I want to be very clear about that, because it's the worst part. A woman brought 61 letters into my shop, and I did not remember her husband's name. I said, Junie, Roy wrote these. She said, what? I said, Roy wrote every one of these letters. He wrote them to himself, and he mailed them to himself, and he signed my name at the bottom, because I said one thing to him in 2003, on the day I fired him for stealing, and he built the whole rest of it out of that by himself. She did not believe me. I want to give her that properly, because the next 20 minutes were not pleasant, and she had every right to all of it. She said I was lying. She said no man writes himself 61 letters over 22 years. She said I was protecting myself, which, given that she'd walked in believing I was her husband's dearest friend, was a reasonable thing to think. And then she went quiet, and she picked up the 2022 one, the one where Emmett tells Roy, no, you are not that. And she said in a completely different voice, he always printed. He never used cursive, not on a birthday card, not on anything. 14 years, and I have never once seen my husband use cursive. And she sat down on the floor of my shop. Not a stool, the floor. She said he was out there in a trailer in North Dakota, writing himself letters, and then he'd stand in line at a post office. I said yes. And she said the thing I have not been able to get out of my head in the year since. She said, do you know what I thought when I found this box? I thought, thank God there was somebody. I sat on the bed and I cried, because for 22 years my husband had a friend and I never knew, and it made me so happy. Then she said, and now you're telling me there was nobody. There was never anybody. He was doing it by himself the entire time, and I was in the next room. There were 61 letters in that box, all mailed, all postmarked, except the last one. The last one was dated the 9th of June, and it had no stamp on it, and it was the only one in the box written in cursive. And it wasn't from Emmett, it was from Roy. Junie, I'm going to go and find out if he remembers. I've been carrying a version of a man around for 22 years, and I don't know if he's real, and I need to know. If he doesn't remember me, I think I'd rather you didn't have to watch me find out. I'll call you when I've done it. Don't tell your mother. Roy. She read it out loud to me. She'd read it about 400 times, and she said 4 months, he hasn't called. I said, where would he have gone to find me? And she looked up and said, here. He was 1.8 miles away. He'd been in Muncie since the 11th of June. He was working nights at a distribution warehouse on Cornbread Road, loading trailers, living in a weekly rate motel on the bypass. 4 months, 1.8 miles from my front door. We found him in a day and a half, and it wasn't detective work, it was Junie calling every motel in the phone book, which is a thing that still works. I went with her. I want to be honest that I nearly didn't. I sat in my truck in that motel parking lot for about 11 minutes trying to work out what I could possibly say to a man who had built 22 years on $90 and 1 sentence from a man who forgot his name. He opened the door, and he looked at his wife, and then he looked at me, and he said, and this is the only thing he said for a long time, he said, you came here. And I said, you were 1.5 miles away, Roy. And he said, I know. I drove past it in June. I drove past it about 40 times. I said, why didn't you knock? And Roy Vetter, 41 years old, standing in the doorway of a motel room, said, Because if you didn't remember me, then the last 22 years were something I did to myself. That was 14 months ago. Here's where it all landed. Roy and Junie are together and it is not fixed, and they'd both tell you that. He was in a chair in an office in Anderson every Tuesday for about 9 months, and he still goes twice a month. She had to work through the fact that the most intimate correspondence of her husband's life was with himself, in the same house where she was making dinner. She has said to me more than once that she'd have handled an affair better, and she means it, and I believe her. Their daughter is 13 and knows the outline and not the details, which was their decision, and I think it was the right one. I did not sell the building. I want to tell you the reasoning on that, because it wasn't sentiment. I stood in that shop the week after, and I did the arithmetic that Roy's own fake letter told him to do. Look at the record instead of the feeling. And the record said that one afternoon in August 2003, in that building I said 9 sentences to a crying 19-year-old, and one of them held a man together for 22 years. I do not know what else I have done. I genuinely do not, but I know that. Roy started with me in February, fabrication, mostly cutting and cleanup, and he's better at it than I was at 41. I gave him the box back. He asked me to keep it and I said no, and we went back and forth for a while, and it's currently in his garage, and he says he hasn't opened it since. And on his first Friday I paid him in cash, out of the register, and neither of us said one single word about it. One last thing. I could have lied to her. I want you to actually sit with that, because I've had 14 months and I'm still not settled. She walked into my shop absolutely certain that her husband had one true friend in this world, and it had made her happy, and she said so. And I could have said yes. I could have said, Roy and I wrote for 22 years, he's a good man. I'll help you find him. She would never have known. There was nobody alive who could have contradicted me. Instead, I told her the truth in about 9 seconds, and I watched a woman sit down on a concrete floor. Some people tell me the truth is the only thing that got him out of that motel room, and that a comfortable lie would have left him loading trailers on the bypass for the rest of his life. Other people tell me I took the one good thing she had and put it on the floor because I couldn't stand to be lied about. So settle it for me in the comments. Should I have told her, or should I have let her keep the friend? And if you sat through all of that with me, subscribe. There's a new one every week, and every single one of them is about somebody who said one sentence and never found out what it did. Thanks for sitting with me.